Members will not be in the aisle. The House will be in order. Members will be at their seats. The clerk has opened the roll, and you may record your presence. Please rise and give your attention to the House chaplain, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Representative Barth.
Good morning, friends. Allow me to pray for you. Dear Father, this is the day that you have made, and our desire is to rejoice and be glad in it. Thank you for the opportunity to serve the people of Kansas in this unique position in which we find ourselves. Indeed, you have blessed us that we might bless others. We'll most certainly engage in many conversations of substance and importance in the coming hours. Your word teaches a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Help us to look for the way of gentleness in our debate and decision-making. Remind us, if you will, that few good decisions are made out of an angry heart. We do pray for our national leaders that they might exercise caution and wisdom as they tend to the business of our nation. We also pray for our women and men in uniform today who are tasked with the defense of our nation as well as our very way of life. Protect them with your hand of justice and righteousness. And finally, Father, would you bless our families? May they be nourished at your well of grace. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen.
United States of America, and to the republic which stands, one nation with proud, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
Have all members had an opportunity to record their presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. The Speaker recognizes Representative Waitmaster on a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we bring attention to a beacon of hope and progress in our state, the University of Kansas Cancer Center. The University of Kansas Cancer Center has long been a symbol of excellence, demonstrating an unwavering commitment to eradicating the burdens of cancer within Kansas and beyond. Through tireless dedication, groundbreaking research, and compassionate patient care, this institution has become a leading force in the fight against one of the most formidable challenges of our time. Their work was recently recognized by the National Cancer Institute, who rewarded the Cancer Center with comprehensive designation in 2022. With this award, KU Cancer Center is now only one of 56 NCI designated comprehensive care centers in the country, and the only one in our state and region. This is the highest level of recognition awarded by the NCI and is the gold standard for cancer centers. This places KU Cancer Center in the top 1% of cancer centers across the country and means that Kansans will be cared for by the world's leading cancer experts who will have access to cutting-edge research initiatives. To put it simply, this translates to saved lives. Patients treated at NCI designated care centers have a 25% greater chance of survival. I'm fortunate to be joined today by leadership from the University of Kansas Cancer Center, as well as 2 cancer survivors. Dr. Roy Jensen serves as the Vice Chancellor and Director of the University of Kansas Cancer Center, Director of the Kansas Masonic Cancer Research Institute, and CEO of the Masonic Cancer Alliance. Since joining the Cancer Center in 2004, Dr. Jensen has recruited a world-class leadership team and built a robust research program that made the comprehensive designation possible. Jeff Wright serves as the Senior Vice President of Cancer Services at the University of Kansas Health System. Wright serves as the current chair of the Board of Ambassadors for the American Cancer Society. CC Rojas is co-owner and president of Tico Productions and Tico Sports, a multicultural marketing firm located in Mission, Kansas. She is also an engaged citizen, serving on the boards of several community organizations, including the YMCA. In 2017, CC was diagnosed with stage 4 large B-cell lymphoma. She underwent several chemotherapy treatments, including 2 CAR-T treatments and a bone marrow transplant. CC has been in remission since 2020. Darren McLaughlin serves as the Chief of Police for Merriam, Kansas, and has been serving the citizens of Merriam for 34 years. He is married to his wife, Mindy, and the father of 2 children, Kyle and Grace. Darren was diagnosed in January of 2019 with stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He received CAR-T therapy in June 2019 and has been cancer-free since July of 2019. Fred Logan is the chair of the Masonic Cancer Alliance Partners Advisory Board. In 2023, Fred received the first ever Chancellor's Award for Distinguished Service, in part for his work in support of the University of Kansas Cancer Center. They are here today with many others as part of the KU Cancer Center Day in the State House. I ask that if your life has been impacted by cancer in any way, that you stand and join me in expressing our appreciation for the achievements and dedication of the University of Kansas Cancer Center. And also, just to let everybody know, there is more information about the University of Kansas Cancer Center and cancer screenings going on today until noon on the second floor rotunda. Mr. Speaker, I ask that my remarks be spread across the journal.
Without objection, so ordered. At this time, I would like to recognize former Representative Kathy Wolfmore in the gallery. Thank you for returning. Introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Bill 2526 by Committee on Water, requested by Earl Lewis on behalf of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. An act concerning water relating to watershed districts, authorizing the chief engineer to adopt rules and regulations under the Watershed District Act relating to dams, levees, and other water obstructions, removing an exception for the required consent or permit of the chief engineer to construct or modify a hazard Class A dam, clarifying which structures shall be considered water obstructions and not a dam, increasing application fees for a permit to construct, modify, or add to a dam, requiring pre-construction permit fees to construct, modify, or add to a water obstruction or to change or diminish the course, current, or cross-section of a stream, requiring an annual registration fee for hazard Class C and Class B dams that are located on an owner's property, removing statutory fee amounts for inspections, requiring inspections of hazard dams to be conducted by the chief engineer or an authorized representative of the chief engineer, removing requirement for inspection fees to be remitted to the state treasurer, adding a civil penalty of not less than $100, no more than $1,000 per violation, remitting civil penalty amounts to the Water Structures Fund. House Bill 2527 by Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications, requested by Laura Lutz on behalf of Evergy. An act concerning public utilities relating to the State Corporation Commission, authorizing cost recovery mechanisms for certain race-based additions, requiring the commission to evaluate the capital structure of certain public utilities without regard for entities affiliated with such utility, authorizing certain public utilities to elect a specific return on equity in rate proceedings, increasing the peak demand threshold and discount term for economic development electric rates for large facilities, removing requirements for tracking and deferral to a regulatory asset of revenue reductions caused by economic development rates, authorizing a rate adjustment mechanism for the construction of new gas-fired electric generating facilities. House Bill 2528 by Committee on Taxation, requested by Representative Bryce on behalf of Representative Roth. An act concerning property taxation relating to residential property, restricting homestead taxes to not more than the established base year amount for individuals 65 years of age and older. House Bill 2529 by Committee on Taxation, requested by Representative Helgerson. An act concerning income taxation, decreasing the rate of tax for individuals, amending KSAs. House Bill 2530 by Committee on Insurance, requested by Eric Turk on behalf of the Kansas Insurance Department. An act concerning insurance relating to insurance laws and enforcement thereof, removing automobile club from the definition of person. House Bill 2531 by Committee on Insurance, requested by Eric Turk on behalf of the Kansas Insurance Department. An act concerning insurance relating to risk-based capital requirements, updating the version of instructions in effect. House Bill 2532 by Committee on Insurance, requested by Eric Turk on behalf of the Kansas Insurance Department. An act concerning insurance relating to group-funded liability and group-funded workers' compensation pools, changing certain reporting requirements. House Bill 2533 by Committee on Insurance, requested by Eric Turk on behalf of the Kansas Insurance Department. An act concerning insurance relating to examinations, requiring that insurance examiner per diem amounts and expenses, outside consulting and data processing fees, and pro rata funding for examination equipment and software be reasonable, establishing a tiered fee structure for examinations of insurance companies and societies based on gross premiums. House Bill 2534 by Representatives Proctor, Blex, and others. An act concerning income taxation relating to Kansas adjusted gross income, providing a subtraction modification for amounts received as compensation for serving in the armed forces. House Bill 2535 by Committee on Elections, requested by Representative Wagner. An act concerning campaign finance, prohibiting the use of cryptocurrency, deleting the prohibition against the use of campaign funds for a candidate for federal office. House Bill 2536 by Committee on Child Welfare and Foster Care, requested by Rachel Marsh on behalf of the Children's Alliance of Kansas. An act concerning children and minors relating to the revised Kansas Code of Care for Children, establishing sole family legal permanency as a permanency option for children in need of care who are 16 years of age or older, allowing courts to establish sole family legal permanency, defining sole family legal permanency, reconciling definitions of behavioral health crisis in the revised Kansas Code of Care for Children. House Bill 2536 by Committee on Local Government, requested by Representative Blex on behalf of Representative Bryce and the City of Independence. An act concerning municipalities relating to the authority of cities and counties to enter into contracts, mandating that certain contractual provisions be incorporated into all such contracts, including the provisions of Department Administration Form DA-146A, providing certain exceptions. House Bill 2538 by Committee on Local Government, requested by Representative Fairchild. An act concerning taxpayer notification costs fund, continuing the reimbursement from the fund for printing and postage costs of county clerks through calendar year 2028. House Bill 2539 by Committee on Education, requested by Representative Thomas. An act concerning post-secondary education relating to Kansas Promise Scholarship Act, removing the Kansas residency requirement for eligibility for such scholarships, modifying the definition of part-time student. House Bill 2540 by Representative Wassinger, an act concerning public health relating to the practice of cosmetology, definitions, exempting the practice of hair removal by sugaring from the definition of cosmetology. House Bill 2541 by Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources, requested by Representative Blex on behalf of Kansans for conservation. An act concerning natural resources relating to state monies for conservation, establishing the State Conservation Fund, the Working Lands Conservation Fund, the Wildlife Conservation Fund, and the Kansas Outdoors Fund, providing for the use of monies in such funds by the Kansas Department of Agriculture and the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks, requiring certain reports regarding such funds be made to the governor and the legislature, authorizing certain transfers from the State General Fund and the Lottery Operating Fund to the State Conservation Fund, transfers from the State Conservation Fund to the Working Lands Conservation Fund, Wildlife Conservation Fund, and Kansas Outdoors Fund. House Bill 2542 by Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources, requested by Kelsey Olson on behalf of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. An act concerning agriculture relating to the Kansas Pet Animal Act, certain defined terms, operating an animal shelter or pound, making changes to certain defined terms, refusal to issue or renew, and the modification, limitation, suspension, or revocation of any license or permit. Immediate actions to protect the public interest, requiring the posting of a cash or security bond to pay for the costs of caring for a seized or impounded pet animal, requiring certain licensees that cease to engage in licensed activity to notify the commissioner at least 10 days prior to ceasing business, or if extenuating circumstances exist, not later than the date such activity ceases, requiring a closing inspection to confirm licensed activity has ceased prior to the expiration of the license period, requiring certain additional rules and regulations, increasing the maximum amount of certain fees, clarifying the conditions required for a licensed veterinarian to act as or be a boarding or training kennel operator, changing the date during which a license or permit holder that is in the process of ceasing to do business may be issued a temporary closing permit. House Bill 2543 by Committee on Agriculture and Natural Resources, requested by Kelsey Olson on behalf of the Kansas Department of Agriculture. An act concerning agriculture relating to livestock marks and brands, requiring approval of livestock brand applications by the Animal Health Commissioner, submission of brand application and registration fees, increasing the maximum amount for brand registration and renewal fees. House Bill 2544 by Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, requested by Representative Laura Williams. An act concerning taxation relating to income, privilege, and premium tax credits, establishing a tax credit for employers that employ members of the Kansas Army and Air National Guard, and establishing an income tax credit for employees that are members thereof. House Bill 2545 by Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, requested by Whitney Dameron on behalf of Self Storage Association. An act concerning the Self Storage Act, providing for the sale of property not retrieved by an occupant after notice by an operator, allowing electronic signatures and electronic delivery for rental agreements, defining property that has no commercial value, providing for the effectiveness of rental agreements when such agreements are not signed or delivered by an owner or an occupant, specifying custody and control of abandoned or towed property. House Bill 2546 by Committee on Taxation, requested by Representative Helgerson. An act concerning sales and compensating use tax relating to sales of food and food ingredients, reducing the rate of tax imposed, modifying the percent credited to the State Highway Fund from revenue collected. House Concurrent Resolution number 5021 by Representatives V. Miller, Alcala, and others. A proposition to amend Section 1 of Article 11 of the Constitution of the State of Kansas relating to the assessed valuation of property and determining property taxes for real property used for residential purposes and real property necessary to accommodate a residential community or mobile or manufactured homes.
Messages from the Senate. The clerk will read.
The Senate announced the appointment of Senator Corson to replace Senator Holland as a conferee on Senate Bill 15. The Senate adopts the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2284.
The Speaker recognizes Representative Adam Smith for a motion to adopt the Conference Committee report on House Bill 2284.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good morning, body. Hope everybody's had plenty of coffee this morning. Certainly had some great groups in the Capitol this morning providing breakfast, and thank everyone for that. Mr. Speaker, Conference Committee report on House Bill 2284. And just for everybody's information, in case you're following along in the bill brief, I try to track my notes. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I try to align my notes with the bill brief, so if you are following along in the bill brief, I'm not jumping all over the place. But want to start off taking a look at the bill or the CCR brief, and it starts off with the first piece of this package, and that is the individual income tax rate. We do make changes to set the rate. We currently have a three rate system. We are changing that to one rate in a single bracket system. The rate is 5.25. It does move, and this is the key, really the key component of this. Can everybody hear okay? They can hear, they're just not listening. That's story of my life. You want me to continue? Yeah. Okay. Okay, I'll continue. Okay, the key component that makes this, the single rate bracket work the best is the fact that we've moved really that point of taxation. I'm not going to get into the weeds too much here, but when you calculate your Kansas income tax, you start with your federal adjusted gross income. You take that number and you subtract your personal exemptions. You subtract your standard deduction or your itemized deductions, and then that number that you have right there, that starts your Kansas taxable income. Now, in current law, we don't tax that first dollar until you get to $2,500 if you're a single filer, or $5,000 if you're a married filing joint tax filer. But the problem is, this doesn't get a lot of attention because it is so small, but we have a tax cliff in our income tax code. Because once you make $2,500 and one, or $5,000 and one, we go ahead and we go back to that first point and you owe income tax on that whole piece. What we've done in the CCR for House Bill 2284 is we have changed that. We've removed that cliff. Not only have we increased that taxable income point to $6,150 for single filers and $12,300 for married filing joint, but we've made that first dollar that puts you over that threshold, you're only taxed on that dollar. It's very similar to what we have in our Social Security income tax problem where you have that cliff, and we've eliminated that. I want to run through just a little bit here because it is a little complicated. But you can really consider this. I've heard it called the single rate. I've heard it called the flat tax. I've heard it called things I can't repeat up here. But this is really a dual rate tax program now because we have removed that cliff. So you have an entire group of Kansans now that will be paying 0% on their income tax up to that new taxable income point. I had a request in from Department of Revenue to run those numbers. I do have a report that I could kind of extrapolate those numbers, and I just got those just a few minutes before I walked up here, actually. The total number of Kansans that will not have any taxable income is 341,747. That is an increase because of this tax plan right here. That is an increase of over 300,000 Kansans that will have no taxable income. That's huge. I've heard a lot of things about how this single rate tax plan does nothing for the middle class tax filers. There's no relief, and that's completely false. If all we were doing was a single rate, the income tax pieces of this, it might be considered true, but we built a broad tax package that provides income, property, and sales tax relief. You know, when I first heard the term gaslighting, I wasn't really sure what it meant. I had to Google it. But it's essentially when you tell a partial truth and you tell it so passionately and over and over and over that people begin believing it. And to say that this tax bill, this entire tax bill does nothing for those middle class income tax folks is completely false. I'm going to move on to the next provision of the bill, which is the Social Security benefit exemption. Currently, there are 38 states in the nation that don't tax Social Security or don't have income tax on Social Security benefits. As I said earlier, in Kansas, current law right now, we have a fiscal cliff of $75,000. So once you hit that $75,000 and you go over that, the entire portion of your Social Security benefits become taxable. That can be a $1,000 to $1,200 shock for somebody who didn't realize that they were getting close to that threshold. We've had several ideas go through this chamber, go through the Senate over the years to eliminate the cliff and just kind of smooth it in a little bit. Last year in Senate Bill 169, we had a plan to phase out the income over income tax on Social Security benefits over a 3 or 4 year period.
governor proposed complete elimination. The Senate proposed complete elimination, and that is what is in this bill, is we are completely exempting in tax year 2024 income tax on Social Security benefits. The next provision is the standard deduction for the cost of living. I think I'll talk about this and the personal exemption at the same time because it's important to understand how critical it is to build a dynamic tax code. Right now, we have a stagnant tax code. Our standard deduction is a fixed dollar amount in statute. It's $3,500 for single filers, $5,000 for married. Or excuse me, $8,000, that's correct. I was getting my numbers mixed up, thank you. Our personal exemption is $2,250. Those numbers have not been changed in a long time. I think the personal exemption, it's been since the 90s. I know we increased the standard deduction not that long ago, but these are still stagnant numbers. And if we have learned anything from the last 3 or 4 years is inflation impacts the amount of disposable income that folks have. So we need to build in some type of growth index in these numbers to where if you're earning more income, you're actually getting a better benefit. With inflation, you're getting the benefit of a higher standard deduction automatically. It doesn't have to come through the legislature, it just automatically happens every year. So what we've done with both the standard deduction and the personal exemptions is we have tied those to the CPI, the Consumer Price Index. There's a growth index that's applied to these, so those numbers continue to grow as you see inflation rise. We also increased the personal exemption. That is something that is very important to Kansas families because you get a personal exemption for every member of your household. If you're filing single, you get 1 exemption. If you're married, you get 2 exemptions. If you're married and you have 3 kids, you get 5 exemptions. So we've increased that by $50 from $2,250 up to $2,300. And you are now, so if you've got a family of 5, that exemption has grown by $250. The next provision of the plan is the change in the financial institutions privilege tax rate. Several years ago when we passed the Apex legislation, we had a provision in there that as certified applicants for that incentive were approved, it would buy down the corporate rate for all existing businesses in Kansas. Since banks don't pay an income tax or the corporate income tax, they have this privilege fee. It was considered to try to level the playing field and treat everybody fair. We should also adjust their privilege fee rates at the same proportion that we reduced the corporate income tax. Now that we have the 2 certified, well, I think actually only one's been fully certified, but we do fully anticipate that both of those companies will be certified through Apex. The next provision is the food sales tax change. Again, this was a provision that was out of Senate Bill 169 last year. Obviously, we can't go retroactive on sales tax, so we can't go back to January 1st of this year. And due to notification requirements for Kansas businesses, you have to impose sales tax changes either at the state level, the county level, on the quarter. So the next soonest time that we can implement this would be April 1st. That is what is in your bill. I'd also like to point out that with those changes, also in current law with that phase out on the sales tax, we have boosted or increased the percentage that goes into the state highway fund proportionately. Those changes all happen immediately. We also repeal that food income tax credit that was on the books. The last provision was the school finance levy residential exemption. I think that is currently, it's an odd amount. It's not a nice round number because we set that at $40,000 and then we also applied a growth index to that so it changes as the housing markets and values grow. I think that number right now is around $42,000 or $43,000. We are proposing to increase that to $100,000. Again, this is just on the statewide levy for school districts, that 20 mills that we approve every 2 years. This isn't on all property taxes, so this isn't affecting the tax base for your local governments, your cities, your counties, townships. They still have their full tax base there. Any money that is reduced from general fund, once I get to the fiscal note, you'll see that this has a fairly significant fiscal impact. It is backfilled through SGF, so we remain in compliance with the Supreme Court decision on school financing. Last thing I guess I want to take a look at is on the back page of your bill brief, if you've got that, is the chart including the fiscal note for all of these provisions. It has them by line item for fiscal year 24, 25, 26, and 27. I'll just give you the totals. You can look up the entire chart if you wish. For fiscal year 24, since we are accelerating the food sales tax, there is a fiscal impact that happens in fiscal year 24 of about $25 million when you look at the SGF and the State Highway Fund pieces of that. For fiscal year 25, that number is about $450 million. For fiscal year 26, it jumps up to about $560 million. And fiscal year 27, $585 million approximately. Now, I know I'm not probably going to change any minds. I'm sure everybody before they walked in here today is pretty sure how they were going to vote on this. So I really debated on how much detail to go into and what to say, but I do want to address some of the rhetoric that I've heard around the tax plan that was proposed both last year that got vetoed and this plan that is fairly similar before us today. You know, I've heard some comments about how this is just a tax cut for the rich. In fact, about a week ago, the governor stood in this chamber and addressed us all in the state of the state and said, quote, "It only benefits the super wealthy." Now, lots of people that oppose this, I've heard say that the super wealthy are not going to be paying their fair share anymore. But I'd like to ask those people, can you define what fair share is? Can you explain that to me? Can you define what super wealthy means? What dollar amount? What proportion is that? Because it's really easy to throw out these ambiguous terms if you don't have to explain yourself. And I have yet to encounter anybody that's willing to explain at what dollar amount do you become wealthy? At what dollar amount do you become super wealthy? And then there's the highest, super duper wealthy. The fact is, nobody can explain these because they're subjective terms. I'm probably considered wealthy compared to somebody who makes a tenth of what I do. There's a lot of people that make 10 times what I do. I would not consider myself wealthy compared to them, and there's probably people that make more than 100 times what I do. It's subjective. You know, currently we have a graduated tax scale, but there is no rhyme or reason behind those rates and those brackets. I was here in 2017. It was simply what we could get past, what we could get the votes for. They're completely arbitrary, and if you disagree, I would like somebody to explain them to me and the reasoning, the philosophy behind those. I did the math, and our second tier rate right now is 69.3% higher than the first rate. Is there a reason for that? And if there is, why is the third tier only 8.57 higher than the second rate? Currently, our income levels are at $15,000 and $30,000 for a single filer and double that for married filing joint. Can you explain to me where those amounts came from? Are they tied to an average income wage or an average income in Kansas? Are they tied to federal poverty level? No, they're completely arbitrary. It's whatever we could get the votes for. I would argue that a single rate tax policy is fair. It treats everyone proportionately. If you make twice as much income, you pay twice as much tax. If you make 10 times the income, you pay 10 times the tax. I can't think of a more simple tax code. And if you disagree, I'd like to ask you if this single rate tax concept is okay for sales and property tax, why is it not also okay for income tax? Can you support the idea of a graduated sales tax? The more you buy, the more you pay. If you buy something that's twice as much as another guy, should you pay 4 times as much tax? About a property tax. Should people with higher valuation homes pay a higher mill levy? Maybe you're okay with that, but if you can't answer a resounding yes to that, I'd like you to answer why we shouldn't do the same for our income tax structure. You know, in Kansas, this kind of seems to be a partisan issue, but I will let you know just some of the statistics from around the nation. There are currently 13 states that have a single rate income tax structure. 9 states in the nation don't even have any income tax, but there's 13 states that have this. And among those are Colorado and Illinois. Those are some of the most bluest states in the Midwest region. Colorado has a 4.4 income tax rate, and Illinois has a 4.95 income tax rate. They're both under 5. I can't think of what all the rates are across the nation, but they're right around that 5%. You know, last night, I don't get on social media a lot, but somebody had sent me a link to something on social media. And it had been so long since I logged in, I couldn't even remember my password, so I had to figure out how to get into it. But there was a sheet, and I printed one off because it was a sheet that I made. If I have it, maybe I didn't even bring it. I won't hold it up because I don't want to use a prop at the well, but I think you all know what I'm talking about. It was kind of a simulated run on how this single rate income tax proposal would affect folks at different levels of income. And there wasn't anything magic to this chart. It's just a math formula. I'm a numbers guy. Numbers usually don't lie. They don't tell the whole truth all the time, but they don't lie. It's a mathematical formula. I didn't create the chart that I saw on social media, but I did create it. I mean, I have a spreadsheet. I can plug in what your federal adjusted gross income is and what that would mean in your Kansas tax. But in my sarcasm, I had to look at that because I looked at it, and the bottom limit, the upper limit on the bottom of the sheet was $5 million. You know, when I first started seeing those, it was around $250,000, $500,000. Then it was $1 million. Now it's up to $5 million because the bigger you make that number, the more shocking that tax saving is for those high income earners. So in my sarcasm, I replied on the post. I said, well, let's take a look at $10 million or $25 million, or why not even $50 million while we're at it? Because those numbers would look awful. But the problem with that is, and I realized this, and I thank whoever originally posted that. I'm sure it got shared lots of times, but it made me start thinking about that. Wait a minute. I've made that sheet myself, and it's wrong. The math is right, but that's not how the income tax code works, because it assumes that every single person takes the standard deduction. And that is not correct. Somebody that's making $5 million, if they're taking the standard deduction, they first of all need to find a new financial advisor. But the Department of Revenue puts out an annual report, and the folks that make $250,000 or more have an effective tax rate of not 5.7, not 5.25, but 4.2%, because they are itemizing, they're taking advantage of all the deductions and tax credits they can. They're trying to be smart with their money. You know, kind of as a side note, I'm trying to think if you think somebody that's making that amount of money isn't spending it, why do we want to capture it at 4.2% on income tax when they could spend it and we could earn 6.5% on sales tax? But that's just a side note. But you need to realize that those tax runs that you look at, even though they're mathematically correct, they don't measure the taxpayer behavior. We don't know how much somebody who makes $5 million a year is going to itemize. You know, one thing that chart also didn't show that I usually show on my charts is how much, if somebody truly was making $5 million a year, I don't know how many people there are out there that do. I'm sure we've got some professional athletes and coaches and things like that make a pretty decent salary. But what it doesn't show is what those people are paying. If you're making $5 million a year, I won't ask for a show of hands because that might break decorum, but I want you to think about it. Yeah, thanks. If somebody's making $5 million a year, how many people here, ask yourself, how many people think they pay about $50,000 in tax, income tax? About $100,000. How about $200,000? Using the chart, assuming that everybody takes the standard deduction, if you would do that, you are paying an income tax. Let me find my notes here. $283,000, $372. And according to that chart, you're getting about a $22,000 tax savings. That's about 7%. But like I said, those numbers are wrong. When people itemize, if I use that effective tax rate, you're still paying about $210,000 to get probably about a $4,000 or $5,000 tax cut. So, Mr. Speaker, I guess my question to the body, and specifically to those who oppose this idea, is are you really going to refuse to eliminate income tax for over 300,000 Kansans? Are you really going to refuse a total tax relief package of $450 million, $560 million going back to Kansans, just so people like Bill Self and Travis Kelsey don't get a tax cut? Mr. Speaker, I move that the committee adopt the conference committee report on House Bill 2284, and I'll stand for questions.
Is there discussion? The speaker recognizes Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Or Speaker Pro Tem. I'm going to rise in opposition to the conference committee report. That's probably no surprise. I do want to say, in terms of explaining what's in the bill, the carrier did a really good job on that. And I do agree it's been a long time since we increased the personal exemption. I was here. I believe it was 1988. So, yeah, it's been that long. But, overall, and I appreciate the work that the chairman does and the work we do in tax committee. But I really believe we can come up with a better product. And my biggest problem with this bill is, we talk about what it gives in tax relief over 3 years, $1.6 billion. But we give very little between those people making between 40 and 80,000. They get very little of this. We really need to do a better job of making sure the people in the middle get some tax relief. So you look down a breakdown of the bill, and about $300 million of it comes from the single rate tax. Of that $300 million, $260 million goes to Kansas residents. And $136 million of that goes to those residents making over $250,000. So over half that tax relief, or to people making over $250,000. That's 48,000 filers in Kansas out of 1.3 million filers. Now, well, how do the other groups compare? Well, one thing I do like about what we've done is we do try to take care of the poorest Kansans. As the chairman mentioned, we get rid of the cliff. We increase the amount where you don't owe taxes at all to $6,150 for singles, $12,300 for married couples. But still, who we really leave out of the middle group. But even then, the bottom group doesn't get a lot of this tax relief. We have 750,000 Kansans that file tax returns with 50,000 or less, and they get 32 million. You're talking about $300 million tax bill. 32 million goes to that group. But the big group that gets hit's the middle group. The people making between 50,000 and 100,000 get 20 million out of this. 20 million out of the 300 million. That's the big middle. The people in Kansas that work hard, pay their taxes. 300,000 income tax filers in that group. They get just 20 million. 136 million go to those people making over 250,000. I think we can do better than that. When you break it down, say, how does it actually affect people? Look at a married couple with no kids. If their income in Kansas, their federal adjusted gross income, and they take the standard deduction, if they're making between $40,000 and $80,000, they basically get a 75-cent tax cut. 75 cents out of that big income tax. If they got 2 kids, goes up to $1.25, but they're not getting much relief. Now, of course, this is $300 million of our tax cut bill. It's a big portion of that, over $500 million a year. But we have some other pieces. So if we do this on the income tax side, we got to make sure those other pieces help those people in the middle between 40 to 80,000 because they're not getting relief from this. So, yeah, the second biggest piece is the Social Security exemption, $125 million a year. Well, first of all, to get it, you have to be paying Social Security, and a lot of people in that group aren't. But even if they are, in Kansas right now, we already exempt Social Security income from 75,000 or less. So again, that people in the middle, those people between 40 and 75,000, they get nothing from that $125 million tax cut, nothing. And even those who qualify, again, 110 million or so, 108 million of that 125 million is going to people that make over $100,000. They're retired, they make over $100,000. Again, a pretty large portion going to the upper end. So the last big piece we have, and the only thing I think where that middle income group can get relief is the homestead exemption piece, which again, I appreciate raising from about 42.5 to 100,000, because that will give them again, if they own a house worth 100,000 or more, they will get about $130 of property tax relief each year. So they will get something from that. But if they're renters, they probably won't get that. If a house is worth less, they'll get less. So while I appreciate the work, and I think it's very, very important, I think it's imperative we give tax relief this year. We have got to do that. I have a lot of faith in our tax committee. I think we do a good job. I think we can do a better job of coming up with a plan that helps those people in the middle more. Those everyday Kansans, the people making that 40 to 80,000 that are getting virtually nothing out of this tax package. We can do a better job. So I would urge you, vote no.
For further discussion, the speaker recognizes Representative Helgerson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. First, I just want to say how much of an honor it is to serve with the chairman and the ranking D on tax. But I'm going to talk about something different. These two are talking about who gets the tax reduction. My comment is going to be how much. You look at the out year figures and what's proposed. We have $600 million worth of tax reduction in one plan. We have the governor's, which is 300 and some million. Hey, I'll tell you right now in front of everybody, I'm in favor of the $600 million. But the only way you get to 600 million is you make a conscious decision that you have to trim the budgets and make sure you don't expand them. And as we're going through the appropriation process, you know, it was a couple years ago, I did a 2% reduction, I lost it. In the appropriation committee, I keep losing all the time about the increases. And I'm saying, you want to do a $600 million reduction in taxes? Hey, I'm right here. But I want to see some people pony up and say, we're going to reduce the budget. We're not going to expand the budget like the governor is doing. We're going to hold the budget line and we're going to put the money toward tax reduction. Until I see that, I'm not going to support this because I'm going to be out there, hanging, trying to cut budgets and, find ourselves in financial quandary about how we're going to deal with this. Have some people come to me and say, look, I think we do it. In fact, there's a bill out there that says this. We want a 2% increase, a true 2% increase in state general fund spending, and we balance the budget with that, and then we can use the surplus for tax reduction. Hey, it's a radical idea. It means that we tighten our budget, even though we have $3-4 billion worth of money. Then we talk about tax reduction when there's 63 votes that are saying we're going to hold the line on the spending. Because right now, I don't see it. I don't see it in the second floor. I'm sorry about that, but that's not the case. And I don't see it on both parties in here. So this is my warning shot. I get kidded about being the, more conservative than most of you on this side and almost everybody on this side. And that's true. So here's your chance. If you want to be conservative and keep dollars going to fund key agencies, and then we put the surplus going to tax reduction, I'm right here with you. But I got to see it first.
For further discussion, the speaker recognizes Representative Vic Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Well, I regard myself as a member of the super wealthy, and it has nothing to do with my income. Part of it has to do with being a sit here today with the rest of you, quite honestly. But I rise to make a couple points about this package. And I'll try not to repeat either what the chairman of tax or the ranking member stated. First of all, after I heard that if you make $5 million, you might have to pay $283,000 in Kansas tax. I checked inside my breast pocket and my heart was not bleeding. Woe is me, $5 million. And you're worried about how much you pay in Kansas income tax. I've never met a person that made $5 million and felt they paid too much Kansas income tax. And I certainly would be willing to wager not a single one of those people lives in my district or anywhere close to that level of income. And I stand up here largely to speak on behalf of the people that I represent in my district. What I hear from the people in my district is, please, Kansas Legislature, do something about what I'm paying today in the form of ad valorem, parentheses, property taxes on my home. I don't know who you're talking to or where you live in this state, but that is the number one area that people are asking for relief, is relief on their rising property taxes on their home. This package offers some amount of relief as it relates to that problem, but let's put it in perspective. This provision that raises what some call the homestead exemption, some call the 20 mil statewide levy for education, equates to about, and I'm rounding off, it changes from year to year, but my bottom line is going to be pretty much the same. $90 million in round numbers a year. People in this state pay $3 billion in residential property taxes. So if you have the nerve to go back home and say, I voted for a package that provided property tax relief, please point out that that will lower the average tax bill 0.3%. Go home and tell them that's the relief you gave them and ask them if they're satisfied that you did your job providing tax relief on their home. One of the problems I have voting on this package today is if we were to approve it and it were to be enacted, it would go a long ways in preempting any further discussion this year on what we can do about providing property tax relief. Mr. Chairman, I have one question for you. It may not be a fair question for you, but I have one. A bill has been introduced, co-sponsored by 42 members of this House, both Republican and Democrat, that would provide an additional $130 million of property tax relief in the form of a rebate given to the locals to apply, not to their budget, but to apply to homeowners' tax bills in the form of a rebate. What are the chances that we'll be having an opportunity to present testimony on that bill? And I didn't check. I assume it went to your committee.
Representative, we are focused on the proposal and the debate in front of us, and not about other proposals that are in front of the body.
I appreciate your comment, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, but what we can do in the remaining days of this session as it relates to property tax relief is directly related to what we do or don't do on this measure today. So I would repeat my question and ask if the chair would answer it. The chair of the committee. No. Well, would you email me? People want to know. People want to know if the 42 people that co-sponsored that bill are the only ones interested in doing something meaningful about property tax relief on people's homes. Now, somewhat to the point that my ranking member made. And by the way, I don't know about you, but when those two guys got up here and started shooting this number and shooting this number, I kind of got lost in the weeds. So I'll try to simplify the point. $137 million of this package will go to provide income tax relief for 3% of the people that file from Kansas. 3% of the people will get 52% of the relief, the income tax portion of the bill. Now, you can have your own definition of fair. My definition says that ain't fair, and it ain't right, and it's not where we should be devoting our resources. Consequently, I will be voting no. In terms of all that fairness, where do you go? Where do you go? The public is the reason we have
a progressive income tax. The overwhelming percentage of people in this state support people making over $250,000 paying a different rate than those that don't. That's a fact. May not be in your particular district, there may be exceptions, but in my district, it is overwhelming support for a progressive income tax, not a flat tax. And I will leave you with this thought, a quotation from a great Republican, perhaps the greatest Republican ever. You can fool all the people some of the time, and some of the people all of the time. But you cannot fool all the people all the time. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, Chairman Representative Adam Smith, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to address a few of the comments. I know when we look at different distribution of income levels, I don't have your numbers. You said about 3% would pay or get 50% of the benefit from this package. I think it's also to understand that that's about the proportion that they pay. I mean, it's not because they're getting so much more than everybody else, but the numbers that I had are about 3.8% of the highest income taxpayers pay approximately that 50% of the tax. So any change you make to the tax code, they're going to get a majority of that benefit because it's proportional. I'd also like to address the speaker before that that discussed the budget. I can't say I disagree. And this is one of the complications we have down here is what came first, the chicken or the egg? Do we pass the budget first and then pass a tax plan that matches the budget, or do we pass a tax plan first and force the budget to account for that tax cut? I agree wholeheartely with the comments that were made. If we can get this through, this will be the first time since I've been down here that we have passed a tax plan, a tax cut plan, before we pass the budget. Excellent points. Mr. Speaker, I would close and renew my motion.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2284. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had the opportunity to record their vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none. With 81 having voted in favor and 37 against the passage of House Bill 2284, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. So just a real quick announcement. So with whoever was looking at this board, the House clerk was saying that there's a module out in that board, so they're working on it. Representatives Tarwater, Mason, and Probst are appointed to replace Representatives Adam Smith, Bergkamp, and Sawyer as conferees on Senate Bill 15. Is there any objection to returning to that order of business, introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions? Seeing no objection, the clerk will read.
House Bill 2547 by Committee on Health and Human Services, requested by Representative Epley on behalf of Kansas School Nurses organization. An act concerning schools relating to student health, authorizing the maintenance of emergency medication kits for certain life-threatening conditions, requiring a prescription for distribution of emergency medication to schools, providing requirements for the administration of emergency medication by school personnel, training, exempting certain persons from the practice of healing arts and civil liability if acting in good faith. House Bill 2548 by Committee on Health and Human Services, requested by Representative Epley. An act concerning health and health care, enacting the No Patient Left Alone Act relating to hospitals, adult care homes, and hospice facilities, requiring such facilities to allow in-person visitation in certain circumstances, authorizing such facilities to adopt visitation policies and procedures. House Bill 2549 by Committee on Judiciary, requested by Nancy Strauss on behalf of the Kansas Judicial Council. An act concerning adoption relating to termination of parental rights, requiring petitions to be filed as a part of a petition for adoption or in conjunction with an adoption, setting requirements for petitions filed separately from adoption proceedings. House Bill 2550 by Committee on Judiciary, requested by Representative Lewis. An act concerning civil actions relating to limitations on actions, extending the time to file a claim for damages suffered as a result of childhood sexual abuse, reviving claims against any party for such damages that occurred on or after July 1, 1984. House Bill 2551 by Joint Committee on Special Claims Against the State. An act concerning certain claims against the state, making appropriations, authorizing certain transfers, imposing certain restrictions and limitations, directing or authorizing certain disbursements, procedures, and acts incidental to the foregoing. House Bill 2552 by Committee on Child Welfare and Foster Care, requested by John Monroe on behalf of the Center for the Rights of Abused Children. An act concerning children and minors relating to the Secretary for Children and Families, prohibiting the Secretary from using federal benefits received by a child in need of care for the care and custody of the child, requiring the Secretary to create accounts for children receiving federal benefits, directing the use of the benefits to be for the best interests of the child. House Bill 2553 by Committee on Child Welfare and Foster Care, requested by John Monroe on behalf of the Center for the Rights of Abused Children. An act concerning children and minors relating to children who are missing in custody of the Secretary for Children and Families, establishing procedures for the Secretary and law enforcement agencies after receiving information that a child in custody of the Secretary is missing, requiring the Secretary to obtain and maintain an identification card for children adjudicated to be a child in need of care. House Bill 2554 by Committee on Child Welfare and Foster Care, requested by John Monroe on behalf of the Center for the Rights of Abused Children. An act concerning children and minors relating to the Secretary for Children and Families, directing the Secretary to identify relatives of children alleged or adjudicated to be a child in need of care, requiring the Secretary to file efforts to find relatives or persons with whom the child has close emotional ties and send notice to such persons of the custody of the child. House Bill 2555 by the Committee on Child Welfare and Foster Care, requested by Representative Carr. An act concerning schools relating to school districts and non-public schools, authorizing schools to maintain emergency albuterol kits and school personnel to administer such medication in emergency situations, establishing training requirements for administration of such medication, exempting certain persons from the practice of the healing arts and civil liability of prescribing or administering such medication in good faith.
Are there announcements? Speaker recognizes Representative Blue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know a lot of you have been curious and we've been talking about the death penalty in Kansas and just questions in general. So I went ahead and reached out to the Secretary of Corrections and he's willing to have a conversation. And so I just need to know those who are interested and just to kind of gauge interest. And then I will send out an email to everybody on, he said he'd come over and talk to us and just educate us on it because there's a lot of misinformation. So that's the first part. And second, I want to say thank you to everybody for congratulating my husband and I on our baby. Baby Bryn is the size of a papaya this week. So thank you.
Speaker recognizes Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I have in my hand a resolution for the Kansas Teacher of the Year, which we do every year, acknowledge him on the House floor. I'm willing to take on as many signatures as you want to provide. I'll have it on my desk for a little bit, or you can text me or stop by my office. They'll be here next Wednesday, and we'll recognize them on the House floor. So again, if you'd like to sign on as a co-sponsor on the resolution for the Kansas Teacher of the Year, please let me know. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Wassinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a note that legislative modernization next week will not formally meet as a committee. We will have 2 subcommittees, and we have the agenda out or the notice out of their committee. If you have any questions, let me know. The first subcommittee will meet in our regular meeting room, and the second one is currently, it was 512 North, but they would like to have audio and visual help, so we need to find another place. But I just wanted to let you know this will be published as well. Thank you.
Representative Stocksdale.
Democrats, there'll be no agenda meeting tomorrow or Monday. Our next agenda meeting will be Tuesday morning, 8:30, 152 South. Thank you.
Representative Vic Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I wanted to get up and say thank you to everyone who had Representative Heiberger in their thoughts and prayers. A lot of people have been asking how he's doing, so I want to read to you his words. And by the way, he had a broken bone that required surgery. Surgery went well. I will be back in committee by WebEx on Monday and in person as I can. So thank you all. If you would promise not to call him, but merely to text him with any thoughts, let me know. I've got his cell phone number. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Poskin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I have 2 announcements today. The first is if you will check your email, Representative Heiberger and I have been working on a House resolution in support of the Kansas Free Press. You just need to reply all, and we will add your name to that resolution. Thank you very much. The second announcement is that the Johnson County delegation will be meeting Monday at noon, 142 South, and our sponsor and presenter is the Overland Park Chamber. I have a specific message from the Overland Park Chamber to let you know that we will not be discussing Medicaid expansion. We will be discussing the incredible work that the Chamber is doing on workforce and the challenges facing our businesses. Thank you.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House Committee on Elections is canceled for this afternoon, so we will not be having committee meeting today. We will meet on Tuesday. That agenda should be emailed out rapidly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Featherston.
Thank you. You all have an announcement on your desk about the Early Learning Caucus is going to be meeting on Monday. You can RSVP to Senator Petty's assistant, and we'll be hearing from Zach Vincent on Monday at noon. Lunch provided.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the Speaker recognizes the Majority Leader for a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those in the Veterans Caucus, look for an email reference to the meeting on Monday. Once we have it confirmed, we'll get it out the information. Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until Friday, January 19th at 8:30 a.m. pro forma.
You've all heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.